So I decided to go ahead and go with the video again to kind of talk about my different questions I looked at for this David project. Please excuse me, I did lose my voice a little bit, so it might be hard sometimes for me to speak, but I figured it'd be easier to do it this way to show pictures and kind of talk what I was thinking about. Also, please ignore my Hamilton background. I'm a big fan. So I was looking at the David's project and I really enjoyed this work. It kind of gave me a different perspective on looking at a certain child and kind of helped me really wrap this together. So I have a few pictures that'll kind of go with what I'm discussing. So I'm going to go ahead and start with number one, which is what learning experiences is Flora Elementary promoting by its school design. So I think definitely the one thing I would talk about for this Flora design is definitely it's going for the whole universal school design that we talked about in this chapter. It goes from things like the variety of sitting that you have here, from like these cubes to like the wedges on the floor. Oh my gosh, I'm losing my voice, sorry. To some things like, for instance, in the classroom where they have like the movable chairs, tables, the chairs that spin, just a different variety of chairs and table spaces that you see here. And also the different designs of tables that I see as well that are pretty unique. I think this all goes back to the whole universal design that they were really going for and discussing in the chapter, that they're trying to really incorporate all different students and have room for different students who, for instance, may want to walk around more or may need to fidget a little bit, who can stand. Just different varieties to kind of embrace that. It kind of reminds me of the HCC actually, especially with this type of different design. And I definitely seen how the HCC has been beneficial to people, students of different backgrounds who come in. So I could see how this could be beneficial for students as well. And it definitely, there's like a very big open concept to it all from what it looks like. From at least from the pictures, it seems like there's a pretty huge open concept in each row and space, and they definitely went into detail about that when they described it on the link that you gave us when they were doing the overview of the place. So it definitely has an open concept, which really helps when you're trying to have more space for different students like David to move around and be accessible. So, mobility restrictions. I actually found a few that David might face when he is, for instance, going to Flora Elementary. This is talking about number 2, which is what positioning and mobility barriers might David face while attempting to engage in learning experiences. So, there is a few that I noticed, and I'm going to go into detail about that. So, this first one I see right here is the library. This barrier right here, I don't know if you can see me pointing to it, but this like upheaval, the raise in like the flooring, kind of causes a bit of confusion for me. There might be maybe an entranceway over here that students can roll up on that will be beneficial. But from my standpoint here, this will be hard to access if you are a student who's in a wheelchair. Now I understand maybe you might be able to have the child maybe stay down on the other side where it's not raised and still be involved with the teacher talking. But if they're studying here, or if they're doing story time, or the students are doing an activity right here, David might end up being left out if he is unable to participate and is sitting down here versus up here with the students. And I'll go in later maybe a resolution for that. But I think when they're going off of the whole open concept, open floor concept to embrace other students, they really need to stick with that. I get maybe having a raised area might like add to the design, but I think it's important to keep that for students flatter to make it accessible to him. And like I said, there might be a ramp over here, but I don't see it. Another big thing for me was the playground. I think they went into detail about how it was very inclusive and students could really participate in it, and they spent a lot of money on it, and it's a big focus, but I really don't see a lot of access for students who may have mobility restrictions, especially David. We talked about partial participation during this project, during this chapter, and I don't see any partial participation like the swings that are wheelchair accessible. I definitely don't think he can. This doesn't look like the rubber down mulch that's pounded down. There's no way you can access that with a wheelchair. There's no way. I really don't see him engaging with partial participation with students in the playground at all. there's just nowhere. I can't really see any leeway with it. Maybe if he uses the blacktop that you see right here, he can maybe participate in kickball and everything. But I really still think that the playground is an imperative part of the day for the child. We talk about how children learn through play, and also it's a good social time for them. If students feel left out, like David, and they don't feel like they can be a part of this time, then they're not really getting the partial participation I feel is important. Sorry, once again, I just got over the flu, so I'm losing my voice. Another thing that I noticed here is the classroom seems to have some areas that may cause restrictions for David. Like this area over here, I really see it being hard for David to participate in this area when there's no room really for a wheelchair. And the desk and the tables are put together so tightly that the computers are right next to each other. So this might be accessible to some students, but definitely not to David. And then the computer room really floored me, which I'm sure because it didn't specify like why the different position devices that he had that could possibly help him participate, like the table. So maybe this will be resolved for the computer lab. But there is no room for someone to really, in my opinion, since it's so tightly knit and tightly spaced and how the computers are set up, I don't see a lot of room for David to really fit in and participate. I will go into ways that this can be resolved in the future with different devices for David. Not question number 4, but it's something that I noticed when I was doing my research and looking at it. Also, one last thing I find that could be possibly unique, the art room. I noticed all these different tables, and this is something I wouldn't have considered before, but I used to have a best friend actually who had a wheelchair, and some table like shapes for her were really accessible and some were not. She had a lot of trouble with tables like this, for instance, if the curves were taken up where she couldn't like sit correctly and like kind of participate. So I think definitely looking at table design is important for students. I like how this is done where it's curved out. So like for instance for her, I'm given permission to use her name Shelby. She could like lean her arms out and everything and use it. It was to a level that she could utilize. Definitely having an adjustable table. I don't know if some of these tables are adjustable or not for students like this one, for instance. So definitely looking at table heights and noting their importance. That may be a hindrance or like actually something positive for students. And this table looks pretty high, so this might be accessible, but the shape is important to notice, like how will David like adjust to fit correctly, and then also looking at tables like for instance here, this might be too low for him, and for instance like once again in here, this might be too low for him or too high. So it's just something to consider, table size and table length and just little things I feel like really add up for that student for partial participation. So I chose for number 3, which of David's current AT options allow him to at least have partial participation in the learning environment? So I, once again, think that having a wheelchair can be really great for him because he has access, since it's such an open space that I already talked about. So being able to, for instance, come up to this like learning, I'm just going to call it learning bar, and work with different students. There's different shapes he could probably work with students. He has a positioning device that can really come in handy. That would help with, for instance, if he is in, if he is in, for instance, the computer lab, if he has a positioning device that works helpful, like for tabletop, it brought up that he had a tabletop, that could help for him to have his own computer and still be in partial participation. He wouldn't have to worry about trying to fit in this little area here. And also, like I said, since there's such an open concept, there's a lot of room for him to still move around and still have that one-on-one interaction. Sorry, one second. I wish they went into more detail about his positioning devices that he had, so I could go into more detail about, for instance, like how, not only this wheelchair gives him more access to have partial participation in the different areas I kind of pointed out, but if I knew kind of more of what his devices were, he might, for instance, be able to come up here and participate in, like, for instance, if it's story time, or if he has a communication device, which it did bring up, he didn't really communicate verbally a lot. So if he had a communication device, he could participate in like the open discussions they like encourage. So I'm going on to number 4 now. It's talking about how, for instance, if David was a Floral Elementary student, what AT would they have to meet his needs? I chose the library because I thought it was a pretty cool room. I've kind of pointed it out a bit. They have different table sizes, table lengths. They have this area here. There's a few that I would kind of point out that I feel would be helpful. So this area, I don't know why I keep coming back to this area, but I think because that interaction, that floor time that students have is imperative. And it did bring up that he had positioning devices that can help him with like floor activities. So that's something, going back to number 3, that he was able to be involved. So something that I found on the site that I thought was pretty cool was this Skill Builder strap wedge. It brought up in the details for him that he didn't have like a lot of reaction, a lot of like mobility. So this kind of will have give him the chance to still be mobile and still like interact with floor activities that the students may be doing, and then kind of can resolve that issue of him not being involved here. So I did like that. It looks and also it literally matches like the different pieces on the floor they have. So say if they're doing like a floor activity with like puzzles, or if they're doing a floor activity with story time like I brought up earlier, this gives him a chance to still be on the floor with the students, working with the students. If the students are doing like a group huddle on the floor, this still gives him that chance to help with that. Another thing that I noticed is, like I said, the different areas all throughout here that are open concept for David to kind of interact with different students. I couldn't find on the site, like from pictures, which one would work, but this Easy Stand like Evolve Medium, I feel like would be successful for really helping David like be mobile around the library once again. If the wheelchair like didn't come in handy for spaces like this, this gives him a chance to still have like the tabletop, so he could be seated next to students. Like for instance, if there's not a lot of room around these tables, he can still be next to students interacting with a smart board. Since it's so open, there's room for him up there. Also around here, for instance, if they're doing an activity with this TV, like a reference check or something, he can still be up and near there with this device and still able to participate in the different activities. Just another device I noted. So that is basically all I have, but I did want to take this one step further to kind of look back at museums again. A lot of this open universal design concept reminded me a lot of the Children's Museum that I worked at in Fredericksburg, right next to Giant. There's a lot of universal design talk that goes on for this museum. A lot of, okay, well, how can we have visitors come by? How can any visitor that comes by with any different device be able to access it? And that's really where the open design comes in handy. It literally looks like an open Big Lots, we joke. But if you see here, like there's a lot of flooring that's like open space for them to walk around in. And this is like basically the whole museum. Like it's a huge open concept. Any children's museum, at least in Richmond and Fredericksburg, are open concept like this. And then it kind of also reminded me of partial participation, because if you look at the tire right here, this is the tire, like the area that like different people can climb, visitors can climb. And I thought back to partial participation, and there was argument for partial participation with this area, because handicapped visitors with handicaps, person first, visitors who come by with, like, for instance, who are wheelchairs and stuff, they can't climb this. So they integrated this area right here, which is the dig pit, which, yes, it's not climbing, but the space, which you can't see, it's kind of small, but right here is open for students with wheelchairs and stuff like that to access, and there's like a dig pit for them. And it's also, this whole area below here is all padded rubber. So students with wheelchairs can still like roll up and still like have fun with the students. So I thought it was kind of cool that the museum had that universal design that I learned about today, and it's kind of cool to like link it. And we also make sure like there's shelving that everyone